Okay, welcome back. October, November 2020, question paper 12. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the paper and circle the questions that repeat themselves from October, November 2020, question paper 11. So if you don't understand these questions, just go to them for the full explanation. Okay, so question 10 is the first one. Also question 11. (13). 16 and 17. 22 and 23. 25 and 26. + question 30. Okay, so we start from question 29. Table shows a country's exports and imports. What was the country's balance of trade in goods and services? Okay, so to calculate their balance of trade in goods, we take the export of goods minus the import of goods. Gives us a balance of +10 million. Exports of services minus the imports of services minus 3 million. What does that leave us with? It leaves us with a plus figure of 7 million. What we know is anytime we have a plus, it's a surplus. Anytime we have a minus figure as our total, it's a deficit. So in this case, our correct answer will be surplus of 7 million. Okay, country wishes to increase a current account surplus on its balance of payments. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for a reason why either exports will go up or why imports would go down. Okay, if we abolish an import quota, remember a quota is the limit on the number of imports. What that's going to do is it's actually going to make the level of imports go up, because it makes it easier for us to import goods if there's no quota on the imports. If we increase import tariffs, what is that going to do? That's going to restrict imports. Sorry, thought I was looking at C there. So if we restrict the level of imports, what's going to happen? The level of imports will go down, and we can match that up to what we know should happen over here for an increase in the surplus, which is exactly that. Imports go down. Removing export subsidies, what's that going to do? That's going to bring the level of exports down, because we're giving less money to the exporters. And we know that exports has to go up to increase the surplus. And finally, taxing export producers, again, that's going to bring the level of exports down, because we're now going to tax the people that are exporting to other countries, meaning that the price of the exports will become more expensive and less people in other countries will buy them. Okay, this is a difficult question. What causes the birth rate to fall in a country? Okay, fewer women work. So in that case, if fewer women work, that's going to cause the birth rate to increase. Why? Less women are working, more staying at home. They're more likely to be able to look after children. So that's going to increase the birth rate. Infant mortality rates rise. That does not affect the birth rate. Remember, the mortality rates is the rate at which they're dying, right? So if the rate at which they're dying goes up, that may indicate, let's say, a decrease in living standards, for example, but it's not going to affect the number of children that are born. Optimum population increases, we would expect the birth rate to increase then, because we need to have more people in a country to optimize our resource allocation. But if the medical supplies and healthcare improve, what does that indicate? That indicates that the economy or the country is developing, right, or becoming more developed. And what we know about a developed country is that their birth rates go down and their death rates also go down. We have less people being born, but we also have less people dying. So difficult question there. We go to 24. In countries with absolute poverty, low incomes can start a process that keeps incomes low, right? Now this is called the vicious circle of poverty. Okay, and it's basically an idea that if you're born into a low-income family, how this process happens in order to keep incomes low for those families. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to circle the correct one and then explain how it happens. So the correct one here is D, right? Low incomes, the vicious circle of poverty, you can look it up. It's in your slides and notes on the poverty section. Low incomes will equal low levels of saving, which means that there will be low levels of investment into an economy. Low levels of investment will always equal into low productivity, and low productivity will always equal into low incomes again. So the circle, we call it a vicious circle because the process repeats itself, and it's very difficult to break that process. Okay, 21. Table shows the rate of unemployment and real GDP growth for an economy in 2014 and 2018. Which combination of policy measures would be most effective in returning the economy? So we can see here our real GDP has gone from being positive to negative, and the unemployment rate has increased. What's that telling us that we need to do? It's telling us that we need to move our AD to the right. Okay, my D is looking a bit funny there. So what are we going to use? We're going to use either expansionary fiscal policy, low taxes, increase in government spending, or we're going to use expansionary monetary policy, decrease in interest rates, increase in money supply, depreciation of the currency, or a decrease in credit regulations. So if we look here at A, decrease in direct taxes, okay, increase in interest rate, so that's wrong. Increase in interest rate will move AD to the left because that is contractionary monetary policy. So that's the exact same here for B. Increase in interest rate, AD left. Increase in direct taxes, that is a contractionary fiscal policy. We just talked about what expansionary is, so contractionary is just the opposite. Taxes up instead of taxes down. So the correct answer would be an increase in government spending, which is an expansionary fiscal policy, and then a decrease in the rate of interest, which is an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, 20. Which group should not be included in the measure of unemployment? Okay, how do we measure unemployment? We need to take the number of people who are employed and divide it by the number of people in the labour force. Now remember, the labour force is the people between the ages of 18 to 64 who are actively searching for a job. So A, they are included because even though they're redundant, unskilled workers, they are seeking work. Agricultural workers out of season periods, they are included. They're still going to be seeking work. Those who have left school and cannot get a job, as long as they're still seeking work, they will be included. But students who are in full-time education, They're continuing their education, so they're not looking for a job, therefore they're not included in the labour force. Government wants to reduce the consumption of cigarettes. What policy measure would be most likely to do this? Okay, so increasing a subsidy on cigarettes, what's that going to do? That's going to shift supply to the right, and it's going to actually increase the quantity, okay, which is not what we want. We said that we want to reduce the consumption, so we want the quantity to go down. Increasing income tax, that's not going to have a direct effect on the consumption of cigarettes, right? It's just going to put less money in people's pockets, but it doesn't mean that they're going to buy less cigarettes. The same with increasing interest rates. Increasing interest rates means people will borrow less money and consumption of everything will likely drop, but cigarettes are likely to have an inelastic demand, right? Because they're addictive. Therefore, we can't say that interest rates or income tax will definitely decrease the consumption of cigarettes. But if we increase an indirect tax on them, we are directly increasing the price of cigarettes. So we will move the supply curve to the left. And when we move the supply curve to the left and draw a demand and supply diagram, we can see that the quantity supplied, quantity consumed will drop. Okay, table shows a tax an individual would pay. What type of tax is this? So this is an individual, right? So we know that it's an income tax, which is a direct tax. Okay? Therefore, it's not an indirect tax. That's a tax on goods and services, not on income. And a corporation tax is a tax not on individuals, but on firms and their profits. So now we just need to figure out if it's progressive or regressive. And how we do that is we just calculate the percentage they're paying. If it's a regressive tax, the higher the amount of income, the lower the percentage of tax they will pay. But if it's a progressive tax, the higher the income, the more tax they'll pay. So if we look at when their income is 20,000, the rate of tax they're paying is 2,000 divided by 20,000, that's 10%. 4,000 divided into 30 is 13.33, unless I'm wrong. And 6,000 into 40,000 will be 15%. So what can we see? As they earn more income, the tax percentage that they're paying is higher. So that tells us that it's a progressive tax and not a regressive tax, which would be the opposite effect. Okay, 15 is very simple. Who owns public sector? We learn very early on in economics, public sector is the government. And private sector is private individuals, private firms. So specialist managers, shareholders and individuals may all be part of the private sector. Only the government is public sector. Firm X supplies bricks and decides to merge with firm Y that also supplies bricks. What type of merger is taking place? So I said to you before that the way we do this is, so this is horizontal merger, right? And why is that? Because horizontal, they both make the same thing. They both make bricks. So they're just moving along the chain. Vertical would be if you had, for example, the retailer here that's selling the bricks. You have the brick manufacturer in the middle, and then you have the person who's sourcing the raw materials at the start. So vertical is when they're moving or taking over a firm at another stage of the supply chain, whereas horizontal is they're moving within the same industry. You can recap on your type of mergers. Notes and mind maps are provided in the OneDrive for Unit 3. Okay, the table shows the output and total costs of a small firm. What is the average fixed cost? So we need to find our total fixed cost first to find our average. And then we just divide it by 10,000 units. Our total costs are given. And we can see that at 0 units of output, our total cost is 50. That means that our total fixed cost, because we know fixed costs don't change, our total fixed costs must be 50,000. Okay, so if we divide 50,000 by 10,000, we should get $5 per unit is our average fixed cost when we're producing 10,000 units. So our average fixed cost will always go down as our output goes up. Okay, what does not have an effect on wages in a free market economy? Okay, our answer here is government regulations. And how do you know that straight away? We know a free market economy, price mechanism allocates resources. There is no government involvement. Therefore, the danger levels in the workplace will affect the wages. The higher the danger, the higher the wages. The number of people willing and able to work will affect it, because that will affect demand and supply. And the years of training will affect it. That's the reason why, for example, doctors will get paid more than a cleaner, for example. Okay, government regulations is the obvious one that sticks out because of the fact that it's a free market economy. So for 8, what task is not a function of a trade union? Remember, what a trade union does is they work with the firm to try and get better conditions or better work for their employees, right? So they work with a firm on an individual basis. Therefore, agreeing the minimum number to be employed on a particular job is a function of a trade union. They'll do that for their trade union members. They will negotiate working hours and the conditions of work, and they'll try and get the best conditions possible for their workers. And they also provide legal advice on unfair dismissal. However, what they won't do is they won't decide on the national minimum wage. That will be the role of the government. Okay, trade union does not get involved with the setting of the minimum wage. They will just try and get higher wages for their members. Okay, we're given a supply curve in 7 and we're asked what the PES is when the price rises from $10 to $12. Okay, so again, PES, we did this in QP11. Formula is percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Okay, so all we have to do is calculate that. So here we can see quantity supplied. How much has it changed by? It's gone from 100 to 140. So that is 40 divided by 100. And what does that give us? That gives us 40% for the percentage change in QS. Okay, percentage change in price. Price has gone up by 2. So 2 over 10 will give us 20%. And if we put 40% over 20%, input our formula, we will get a PES value of 2.0. Okay, question 6. Diagram shows the global market for copper with an equilibrium point of X. Which point represents the new equilibrium after the copper producer's costs increase and there is rapid economic growth? So when we get these questions, I always say to you guys, you have to figure out the shift one by one. Okay, no point looking at them both together. That's when you get confused. And mark in on the diagram where each shift will move you to. Okay, so in the first case here, the copper producer's costs increase. What will that do? It's going to increase their cost of production, going to make it more expensive for them to make the product, so supply will shift to the left. So we'll move from X onto this point here. Now, if you've got rapid economic growth, incomes will go up and therefore demand will go up, which means demand is going to shift to the right, leaving us at point A. Okay, follow them one by one and you'll never get them wrong if you know your factors that shift demand and supply. When students get confused with this is they try and do both shifts at the same time and they end up at some random point. Okay, why might a market economy fail to achieve best use of its scarce resources? Okay, so in this case, demerit goods are underconsumed. That's false. Demerit goods are not underconsumed, they are overconsumed because they generate external costs. Public goods are overconsumed. That's also false. In a market economy, there is no public goods. So they can't be overconsumed or underconsumed because there would be none. Resources are owned by the government. That's also wrong. There is no government involvement in a market economy, only in a mixed and a planned economy. So the reason why information failure occurs, or market failure occurs, is because of information failure, where consumers are lacking information about the goods they should buy. Okay, what's an example of a macroeconomic aim? Remember, macro is looking at the whole economy. And an example of that is to create and maintain full employment. Improving efficiency in the manufacturing sector is micro because it's only looking at one sector. Providing consumers with greater information when buying goods and services is micro again, and so is greater occupational mobility of labour. Remember, microeconomics is the study and the behaviour of individuals, firms, households and individual markets. Okay, country move from X to Y. What is the most likely reason for this change? Firms have decided to increase investment in technology. Wrong. That would result in an increase in quantity and quality of resources, so we would have a shift in our PPC, not a movement along our PPC. New economic resources have been discovered. Again, that would cause a shift, same way as A would, to the right. Government has encouraged long-term economic growth. Same thing. We have long-term economic growth. We're going to shift and then we're going to move from here to a new point on the curve if we achieve that actual economic growth. So the correct answer here is the government has brought about an increase in living standards. Simple way to remember it, if we allocate towards more consumer goods, remember consumer goods are what we buy, like television is a consumer good for example, we increase our living standards. Okay, if we allocate more towards capital goods, which is the opposite of what's happening in this case. Capital goods are those that allow us to make more in the future. So long term, we can shift to increase our productive capacity. But short term, we would have a decrease in living standards because we would be making or giving up more consumer goods if we moved towards capital, so from Y to X for example. Okay, which combination of a factor of production and factor income is not correct? So when we have capital, do we get interest? Is that the income? Yes, we do. Interest is paid on capital. Profit is paid to enterprise because enterprise is the owners of the business. Rent is paid to land. Dividends is not paid to labor. Wages are paid to labor. Okay, so they are the factor incomes associated with the different factors of production. So not dividends, wages for labor, everything else is correct. Question 1. What causes economic agents to make choices? So it's the basic economic problem again. Go look at your QP11 video if you want those 5 little sentences we create for the economic problem. But it's limited resources that makes us have to make choices. Okay? Needs are limited for sure, but wants are not limited, they're unlimited. Free goods has nothing to do with the basic economic problem, and the market mechanism just reallocates resources in a market economy. Limited resources, unlimited wants, choice, scarcity, opportunity cost. That's the basic economic problem.